I wanted to find out what their perceptions were of the industry itself. What did they think of themselves and their work that they did? And what did they think the community at large, how did they think American citizens viewed them? And there was an overarching theme. They got up every single day and they did really noble things and did very important things, but they didn't feel like they were respected in it. That came through loud and clear. We were at an executive committee meeting, I think it was in October of 2017. So I'd only been there 8 or 9 months. I laid all this data out for the executive committee and I started asking them if they felt the same way. And to a person in the room, they felt exactly the same way. And I said, well, we can't leave it like this. The whole part of an association is we associate together to lift everybody up. But how do we lift up at people that look down on themselves? You can never get people to respect what you do until you respect what you do.
Hey there, and welcome to Under the Roof, the official podcast of Baker Roofing Company. I'm Todd Kavanaugh.
And I'm Matt Elban, and we're here to connect the dots between field and office, leadership and crew, values and action.
In each episode, we dive into the stories, lessons, and updates that matter to our team.
From safety and career growth to company milestones and good old-fashioned storytelling, it's all about living out what makes Baker, Baker. Let's get into it.
Hey there, and welcome back to Under the Roof.
I'm Matt Elban.
And I'm Todd Kavanaugh. And today we're sitting down with someone who's had one of the most unique career paths in our industry, Mr. Reid Ribble.
Reid's journey is pretty remarkable. He spent 30 years running his family roofing business in Wisconsin, then served 3 terms in Congress representing Wisconsin's 8th district, and then became CEO of the National Roofing Contractor Association, where he led some of the most ambitious professionalization initiatives our industry has ever seen.
His journey, it gives him a perspective very few people in our industry have. He's seen it from the contractor's desk, from Capitol Hill, from the association boardroom, and now from corporate boards. We're going to talk to him about what he learned in each of these roles, his vision for elevating roofing as a profession, and where he sees the industry headed.
Reid, welcome to Under the Roof. We really appreciate you being here. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, it's good to be with you guys.
I'd like to start off with a question I always like to ask. It's one of my favorite things to know about new people, our guests to the show. What's the last book you've read, and what did you take from it?
It's interesting that we were talking before we got on recording, we were talking about golf. This was the book I'm reading right now. You can read it. It's called Caddy Tales. It's by a former pastor in Wisconsin who ran into some difficulties in his work at his church, lost his job because of some personal failures, and became a caddy at Whistling Straits, which is one of my favorite golf courses in the world. And subtitle of it is A Looper's Search for Lost Golf Balls and What He Found Instead. And what he found instead was an attitude of there's always another chance. And for anybody that's played golf, you know that if you have a bad shot, there's always another shot. There's another chance to fix what just went wrong. And he applies these life lessons through his walking around and looping at one of the most beautiful spots on earth, the Whistling Straits golf course in Wisconsin. But there's all these fascinating life lessons that he talks about in that book. It's great.
Yeah, I'll have to pick that one up.
I literally just finished it this morning. So
that's awesome. I appreciate that. I like to keep a list of all the different guests we've had and what their books are and trying to make my way through some of them. So thanks for the referral on that. So before we get into the full story, contractor, congressman, CEO, really quite a resume. Do people believe you when you tell them this, that these are the things you've done, or do they think you're kind of making it up?
It depends on who you're talking to. And the interesting thing is people are so fascinated with the congressional part that they miss the boat on seeing what a person's life actually is. And I've been writing just kind of my memoirs, mainly just for my boys. And after about 45 or 50 chapters, it finally dawned on me, I've never even mentioned I was in Congress. And yet, if I'm walking around, what they know me or they recognize me, that's one of the first things they want to talk about. And I find it the least interesting of all the things I've done.
That's funny. The first time I met you, I was introduced to you by Jason Stanley with IB Roof Systems, and I recognized your name immediately in your association with the NRCA. I got to be honest, I'm not convinced that I remember that you were a congressman before that. My recollection of you was the roofing industry.
Right, which is where I kind of base all the things I learned, the lessons I've really learned in life happened there. And so that's where I'm more.
Yeah, this is a great jumping off point then. You're going to probably discover we've kind of done our research a little bit, Reid.
Oh, I'm nervous. You realize that not everything on the internet is true.
That is absolutely true. But for folks who might not know your whole story, I think it's really helpful to get some context. Can you give us like a thumbnail sketch of your journey? And like, how does a kid from Wisconsin end up running a roofing company, then serving in Congress, and then leading the NRCA?
It's a fairly brief story about getting started in my roofing business. My dad was a chaplain for 2 counties in Wisconsin. He was a Baptist minister, and he was the chaplain for Winnebago County and Outagamie County, Wisconsin. But he had 6 kids, and then at some point, my mom and dad decided to adopt 2 more because apparently 6 weren't enough. But they were all boys, and so they adopted 2 girls. And you can't really feed that many people on that type of income. And so he was handy with his hands. He was a World War II veteran in the Marine Corps. So he started selling roofing company in town to make some extra money. And then that ultimately led to him starting his own very small residential roofing company. And when I graduated from high school, I think he had maybe 3 or 4 employees, and that was it. But it was more of a hobby for him, and I was the youngest, and so he didn't really need the money anymore from the roofing company. He asked if I would be interested in just taking it over, and there wasn't a lot to it. They were doing maybe 2 roofing jobs a week, and that was just during the summer because in Wisconsin, you would get snowed in the winter pretty quick. And so I thought, give it a shot. I don't know anything about it if you'll kind of teach me how to do it. And during my own research, I discovered NRCA because I felt I wanted to, if I'm going to make a career of this and make a living for my own family, I better learn what I'm doing. And so I reached out to the National Roofing Contractors Association, immediately became a member. This dates back to 1975. And it was integral. My relationship with NRCA is really the driving point of virtually every success step I've had throughout my career. That's how it all happened, and that's how I got into commercial roofing.
So it sounds like, you said it yourself, that the NRCA has been a focal point of your professional career and your life in roofing. And then you became the NRCA CEO in 2017 with a clear vision statement. And I love this. And in fact, some of your quotes I've already shared with some people in my team already as I prepared for this. But you said the recognition of our members as professionals and to unite the industry to that purpose, that this just wasn't talk. You backed it by funding. And what made you believe that the industry was ready for this transformation of transforming contractors, the perception of them to professionals?
After I left Congress, and NRCA was so gracious to offer me a position there. If you remember Bill Good, he had been the CEO for 35 years. He was anxious to retire. And, after a full career, you are anxious to retire. I felt the same way when I retired in 2022. But when they offered me that job, the first thing I did was I wanted to refamiliarize myself with the industry. I'd been out of it for 8 years, and to refamiliarize where the industry thought they were. So we did a survey of members and had about 1,500 respondents. And it wasn't just members. It was people who were non-members. It was contractors who were members, contractors who were non-members, distributors, and manufacturers. And at that time, there was this associate membership for manufacturers. Today, they can be full members. But I wanted to find out what their perceptions were of the industry itself. What did they think of themselves and their work that they did? And what did they think the community at large, how did they think American citizens viewed them? And there was an overarching theme was that they didn't feel respected in their work. They got up every single day and they did really noble things and did very important things, but they didn't feel like they were respected in it. That came through loud and clear. And we were at an executive committee meeting, I think it was in October of 2017. So I'd only been there 8 or 9 months. I laid all this data out for the executive committee, and I started asking them if they felt the same way. And to a person in the room, they felt exactly the same way. And I said, well, we can't leave it like this. The whole part of an association is we associate together to lift everybody up. But how do we lift up at people that look down on themselves? And that came up with a line in one of my speeches that I said, you can never get people to respect what you do until you respect what you do. And that resonated. People began to understand that concept. And I remember making a trip. The folks on the board wanted me to familiarize myself with some of the newer, bigger players in the industry. And I had gone to a city to meet someone, and because I don't want to reveal who it was, I won't even tell you where. But I got down to the hotel, and we were going to meet for dinner at 5, and the next day I was going to tour the company. So I did what every good Wisconsinite does. I went down to the bar around 3 o'clock in the afternoon to have a beer. Maybe around 4 o'clock, a gentleman came in and sat down at the bar, and interestingly enough, he sat like one chair over from me. And so we picked up a conversation and started talking. And I asked him what he did, and he said he was in the construction business. And I told him throughout the conversation, I was trying to prod him to tell me more. And it turned out that this was the gentleman that I was going to be meeting for dinner, whom we had never met before. And so later at dinner, I asked him, I said, when I asked you what you did, you didn't say you were in the roofing business. You said you were in the construction business. Why is that? And he said something very telling to me. He said, well, it just doesn't sound as good. And right there, that example summarizes the problem we have with the roofing industry, is we think we don't matter. And what a horrible place to be. Why would you give your whole life to something that makes you feel like you don't matter? And the work is so important. And it was those types of things that really drove me to say, we need to completely change what we're doing. We have to professionalize the industry. We have to get people to be really engaged in what they're doing.
I love that idea, and we'll get to it in a little bit. Some of my background, my story, and also Todd's and some career choices that we've made. But you said something at the 2017 Best of Success Conference. You said, there's not a single mom or dad on the planet who, when their son or daughter is born, looks down on that bassinet and says, wow, I hope you become a roofer when you grow up. And that's really a brutally honest statement. It's probably really factual, too. How do we change that? Because your point about us being proud of what we do, respecting what we do, that has to change, right? I mean, growth and success, that has to change. So how do we do that?
It's a difficult question because it's a sociological issue that the country is facing. And by the way, this is not a new sociological issue. All throughout U.S. history, as immigrants would come to the U.S., they would find trades to do. In the early years of our history, up to the early 1900s, so for the first 125 years or so, the bulk of those trades were in agriculture and construction. And there were some clothes makers, people that made suits and clothing and things like that. We pretty much made everything we needed here. But it was always the first generation immigrants that would come in and do that work, because people would find that working on the farm, working in the factory was difficult, hard, menial labor, and they were anxious to get into more automated forms of enterprise. And so as America industrialized and we began to make things with machines, people gravitated to those jobs. And then as more and more automation occurred, people moved into areas of professional services like banking, finance, insurance, and other things that supported those jobs. And so, but the people that filled those jobs when they were vacated by native-born citizens were often first-generation immigrants. That's still the case today. And so as a result of that, and we know kind of the vibe in the country right now about immigrant workers, people look down on these folks for whatever reason, but they only look down on them until they need landscaping done, or they look down on them until they need a roofing job done. And invariably, and you've probably heard this from your own customers, whether they're commercial guys or a commercial job or a residential job, they talk about how hard your crews work. They'll tell you things like, man, I can't believe how hard those guys work. They came in and just really, really killed it. And so we've got this sociological problem where we want something better for our children than whatever that is. And I think that's normal, Matt, and I think it's probably true in your own life and Todd. that we do that, but it's realistic. But if we really want to elevate the trades, we have to start talking about the trades differently. That's why I'm thrilled about Skills USA and the other things that are going on in an effort to professionalize the industry and get people to be thrilled about doing this type of work.
I think the way roofers have typically talked about themselves, and I've heard this, I know Todd has, I'm sure you have, self-effacing, self-deprecating group of folks who talk about their own job as something no one want to do and it's terrible and all this. They don't talk about the good things we do. And the roofing does a lot of great in the world, in the country, not just putting a roof on and keeping what's underneath of it dry or repairing something, but also even just giving back to communities. The roofing industry in general is very, very benevolent in that. And so how do we attract the next generation to not think that what you just said really, really hit me? I've got 3 kids that are all at that age. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do in their life. They're all either just graduated high school or getting ready to, or in high school. And attracting the next generation to this industry or industries like it, we got to figure out how to do that. And it can't be that we think that, well, do something better than what I did. I'm pretty proud of what I'm doing in the roofing industry.
Well, of course you are. And I'll guarantee you, if you're like every other roofer in the country that I know, when you've got your kids with you when they were little and your wife in the car and you're going to church or the grocery store or whatever, and you drive past a building, you say, Daddy did that roof and Daddy did that roof, and you point at them. And so you're actually proud of your work in front of people that you trust. It's the people that you don't know that you're more self-effacing about it. And so those images are there. And I think in talking with my own kids, because neither of my boys went into the roofing business, the interesting thing is they both told me when they were in high school, there's no way I'm doing roofing. You, pointing at me, you work way too hard. There's got to be a better way to make a living. And so what they did is they saw me as a boomer, somebody who just kind of threw himself at his work every day as working too hard and not being a really good example about that. But what they discovered when they got their own professional careers, if you're going to be successful, you have to work hard at whatever you do. There's just no escaping it. But your broader point, how do we get young people involved and invested in? And I think one of the key things is we have to start talking about the technologies that are being used, the drones that are being flown, the computer systems that are being used for estimating and software that's being deployed at every level of the industry, the robots that are taking place on roofing jobs, how clean it is today compared to what it was. We have to give them a more accurate vision and version of what the roofing industry actually is.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that's something that we can certainly sink our teeth into.
The younger generation is very aware of global climate change, and no matter what your opinion of it is, whether you feel it's man-made or not man-made or whatever, the fact of the matter is the climate is changing. And these children are taught at young ages about trying to be cleaner and living in an environment where cleaner air and cleaner water. Well, how does the roofing industry support that? Well, we do a lot of solar, and they're fascinated with solar energy and things like that. Well, let's get them engaged in those types of things, and you'll draw that kind of purposeful person into your company that way.
That's great advice.
And we're going to come back to that. And I think you're striking a chord with me, and we're going to revisit some of those themes. But let's take a pivot a little bit. And because I think some of this innovation and evolution that's happening in our industry, other outside bodies are taking notice. And that's impacting, I think, the structure of our industry as a whole. And so I want to take a step back a little bit and talk about your journey there. And you sold your family business to your nephew, Troy. Like I said, we did our research a little bit in 2009, really just following a traditional succession path. As you've probably heard, Baker, we chose a slightly different path, and we chose employee ownership through an ESOP. And looking back, were there factors that you weighed thinking about succession and what path to take?
Well, sure. But it happened so fast. There was this opportunity for me to run for Congress, and I didn't have the passion for politics, but when I got it, it was like a fire burning. And so that moved very quickly, and Troy was in the company and ready to buy it. And so I think in hindsight, had I to do it all over again, an employee stock ownership program like what you guys did, I think is a better path. And I wish I had done that in hindsight, but that's not what I did. And had I had a more thoughtful process where I hadn't been pressured a little bit by time, I think that's the route I would have went, because I think giving employees ownership in the business is also a really critical component in building pride in the business, because now they see when they leave a part roll of EPDM or TPO and just toss it in the dumpster or whatever, because they don't think they can use that waste up. They look at it differently because now they're throwing away their stuff. And they're saying, I can cut that for flashings and I can do this or that with it. And so it's just a superior succession plan. And quite frankly, I think it's superior to the current wave of succession, which is the private equity exit. And so because ESOP has a tendency, when employees own the business, it builds it for the long term. Whereas most private equity purchases are with the view of let's build a company and sell it right away and make a bunch of profit. And as a result of that, you downgrade the image of the industry rather than upgrade it.
So obviously the industry is seeing a pretty massive shift, maybe in the last 10 years, consolidation through private equity, especially right now. There are other paths, traditional family like you chose, employee ownership through ESOP, even remaining just independent and just holding on to it even longer until such a time as right to sell. How do you think different ownership structures position companies to compete in this environment now?
So because the boomer generation was so large and there are so many, about 37% of the roofing industry is owned by boomers, that's what has drawn all this private equity money into the system. So private equity is saying, well, let's start buying up these private companies. They don't have a way out. We give them a way out. They can get some money out the door, and they can participate for a year or two to help do the transition. And of course, with Tech to America doing that 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago now, they demonstrated the operating model that actually could work. But there have been plenty of failures along the way and plenty of pitfalls there as well. As I talk with roofing contractors who joined private equity firms, it's about a 50-50 like-dislike version of that, where some people thought it's been great and other people think, God, I wish I had not done this. And so, like I said, when you're buying a company to sell it, your incentive is just to maximize profits in the short term, to do a quick sale and recoup even more money. And so it can damage the reputation of the company and the industry if they're not thinking long-term. And then the third version is the employee stock ownership version, which I really love, because every single employee in the company that owns stock in it is seeking the best interests of the company, because there's a self-interest in doing that. And I think we have to always look back at what is the self-interest, because self-interest is what drives everything. And so by giving all your employees an opportunity to take their self-interest and direct it to the common good is really a superior model in my view.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Reid, this has been fantastic. And typically we have plans to do these interviews in really just one episode, but you've been giving us such a great conversation and content that we really think it's worth continuing and probably breaking this into two episodes. So we're actually gonna cut the episode here, and we're gonna hop back in later and release part 2. So stay tuned for that.
To be continued.
That wraps up this episode of Under the Roof. Thanks for joining us and being part of the Baker Roofing family.
If you liked what you heard, share it with your crew. Hit the follow button and keep the conversation going wherever you work.
We're here to keep you informed, inspired, and included, because the more connected we are, the better we work together.
And as always, we'll leave you with this. We shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time.